comprehensible input will not get you fluent in and of itself. There needs to be a little bit more work done in addition to that, and today we're going to talk about that. So, what exactly is the role of comprehensible input then, right? If it's not the entire thing. The way I think of it is that comprehensible input is like your foundation. It's the base of which everything is built of in terms of your language learning. And so by getting comprehensible input, you basically create a second brain. So for me, I have two brains right now. I have an English brain and I have a Vietnamese brain. And what this Vietnamese brain does for me is it allows me to not only understand Vietnamese at a very high level, but it also allows me to have a monitor of when I'm speaking Vietnamese. I know what I'm saying, if it's correct or not, right? And so oftentimes when people speak before they have a sufficient foundation in comprehensible input, what will happen is that they'll say things incorrectly and not even know that they're saying it incorrectly. Me, however, when I speak, I know when I'm about to say a phrase that's a little bit unnatural because I've never heard a Vietnamese person say it, right? Like my brain draws from the model that I've built off years of comprehensible input and it flags me that, oh, you've never heard a Vietnamese person say this, so what you're saying is probably going to be awkward and it might not be right. Now, this brain does also have its own intuition. So I could actually be saying the right thing. I could not, right? And so that's why it's very important to, number one, have a feedback loop. Having a feedback loop is extremely important because input alone and having your foundation alone is not enough. There's still like a lot of circumstances in which you're going to make mistakes that are going to go uncorrected. Additionally, receiving immediate feedback helps your brain remember the correct information better and not form bad habits. So how do you actually go about creating this feedback loop? There's two main ways that I have. The first one is something that I got from Language Lord, who's a very popular language learning YouTuber. Basically, what you want to do is record yourself speaking for around 5 minutes. Typically, it's just a story, right? So tell a story for about 5 minutes. If you finish your story before 5 minutes, tell another one. Or just, it doesn't have to be a story, but that's just easier. But just 5 minutes of just you speaking. Could be answering a prompt, telling a story, whatever it may be for you. Once you're done with those 5 minutes, you're going to want to watch the video. This is tough. This is brutal. I saw online one time somebody said that listening to yourself, like listening to a recording of yourself speaking in your target language, is like taking a dump and then looking at it for the first time. It's really painful, right? But you're gonna have to brave through that, and you're gonna have to listen and watch yourself basically speak. And anytime you make a mistake, you want to find out what the correct answer is, or what the most natural way to phrase that thing is. There's multiple mistakes you could be making. It could be a pronunciation error. In that case, what you want to do is just practice the correct pronunciation of that word. It could be you used words unnaturally. In that case, you could just ask ChatGPT how to most naturally say it, or even ask a native speaker and then drill that sentence over and over again. And then finally, there could be the case where you just don't know the right words to say. And in that case, I would also recommend using ChatGPT or a native speaker to determine what would be the right word to use in that case. Assuming you didn't know the word previously, because you could run it through like DeepL or Google Translate, but then that's how you get like really unnatural speech that you're gonna have to correct even later. And so by setting up this feedback loop with yourself, you're continuously speaking and revising and speaking and revising. So after you record the story, you're going to want to look up everything, drill everything, and then do it again. And repeat this process 3 times in one sitting, preferably. This will take about an hour. I did it this morning for the first time in a long time. It took me about an hour, and there were a lot of mistakes that I was able to correct. And I could literally feel myself getting more fluent in real time as I told the story again and again. My fluency like visibly, dramatically increased. And so this is a huge way to actually increase your fluency much faster than simply just getting more input. And I don't mean to discount the value of input, because the input in and of itself is how you even begin to know that you're making these mistakes already. As I mentioned, you develop the brain, your target language brain, and then once you develop it, you use it to actually get really fluent in the language. Now, preferably, you'd even be doing both at the same time, like from a very early stage where you're getting massive input and you're also doing regular output practice with a feedback loop. But I'm assuming that a lot of people watching this are in a similar situation to me, where you have just so much abundant amount of comprehensible input under your belt, but just not enough output practice. So you can understand the language fairly well. You just don't consider yourself fluent because you can't speak fluently. And so setting up those feedback loops is very important. The second type of feedback loop is just a conversation with the tutor, just having a tutor to correct you. But the way that the tutor corrects you is actually really important as well. There was a study done where they had information, and a student would repeat the information, and then they would get corrected on that information. And so um, there were two main types of corrections. Number one was a correction where they explained to them like exactly what they did wrong, and they told them like, oh, this is what you did wrong, and here's why it's wrong, and here's how to do it the correct way, right?
Yeah.
That's what they did. And then there was another, and those people the next day were more likely to remember those corrections and get it right the second time. Alternatively, there was a second group who they told them the corrections and then, or they made the mistake, and then when they received the correction, it was just simply the right thing. They didn't explain it to them. They just simply said the sentence correctly. And they're like, "Oh, okay," in a very natural way. Like, they didn't even bring it up, that they didn't say, "You got this wrong." They just said, like, instead of going like, "This is mine's cat," and then the tutor would be like, "This is my oh, this is my cat? Oh, yeah, this is my cat," type of thing, right? They didn't they didn't explain the grammar. The
Mhm.
next day, those students were more likely to make the same mistake again because the
Yeah.
correction wasn't that strong. But here's the kicker: they measured this over time. And over time, the students who received the second type of correction, the recast, they when they received more and more recast corrections over a long period of time, they would more consistently show consistent improvement over time. And the students who received those hard corrections, they received so many corrections and it was so hard and there was so much complexity going on with those corrections, they would just forget and they would make more mistakes and more repeat mistakes over a
Yeah.
long time. And so
Yeah.
before, we used to always do this like hard correction. It's still like, it's almost like the pushy salesman meta, where you just force somebody into submission, which can work short term, but long term for conversion and long term for like getting a deep change in somebody, you can't do that. You can't force them. You have to
No.
allow them to come to their own realizations and show
Yeah.
them naturally, which is like,
Yes.
that's the research that's been done on recast correction. So when I learned
I
about
believe
that, I was like, shoot, that
believe it or
makes
not.
so much sense.
Yeah, I
Let
believe
me
it.
and so you want to teach your tutor this stuff, right? Because you want your tutor
You do
to know
have
about
to
this as
guide
well.
your tutor to do that, though.
Yeah.
To Yeah. But also, now this is an important thing too. If you're the type of person who is guiding your tutor to do that, then that means you, as a student, are looking out for those corrections. You're listening out for them.
Yes.
The,
Yes.
the vast majority of people are not listening out when somebody, like I know people in real life, I speak French here in Brussels where I live. I've got friends and I've got a good friend and he will kind of naturally do recast corrections. I still make mistakes in French when I speak French and he's never ever said to me, "Oh, that's a mistake." But he will recast. And if you're because I'm a keen language learner, um, I understand that that's what he's doing, and I look out for it, and I take it on board and integrate it. If you're not, most people aren't like that, though.
So that clip that you just saw was from the Language Learning Lab. We do video calls every week, and if you want to talk with me and work with me to create a language learning method that works for you, it's a top link in the description. So in order to summarize what we've talked about so far, in addition to, of course, the massive amount of input that you need, you also need to practice output with a very tight feedback loop. I do want to address one more thing here, and that's the fact that getting input will make your output better. That is true. I've observed it in myself and I've seen it in other people's, case studies. But a lot of people, they take that fact and they kind of run a little bit too far with it. They'll think that the more input they get, they're going to get like equally as good with output, when that's really not the case. Input is indirect benefit to your output. The best analogy I can give you is if like a bodybuilding analogy, right? So if you're trying to have the most well-developed upper body possible, right? Input is like your chest and your back. It's like your very fundamental compound movements like your pull-up and your bench press, right? You can't really have a well-developed upper body without doing like the upper body compound lifts. It's very, very difficult, right? And so that's what comprehensible input is. The stuff that we're talking about here, which is like the isolated fluency and speaking work, is more like isolation lifts in the gym, right? Like bicep curls and tricep extensions and things like that. You can have a good looking upper body only focusing on compound lifts. But if on top of that, you add in the isolation lifts, like the bicep curls, the tricep extensions, your upper body is just going to look a whole lot better. Just like your fluency is just going to get way, way, way better. It's going to get way better very quickly. With that said, it's best, like the most optimal thing to do would be to bring everything up at once. So basically, from the moment you start the gym or your language learning, you're basically training everything in a very holistic way. And so that by the time you're like advanced slash fluent, you already have everything evenly developed. And I also really like this analogy because you don't waste time training like your fundamentals, right? You don't waste time bench pressing and doing pull-ups, but you just missed opportunities to also do the isolation lifts, is what I mean. So the one who only does the pull-ups and the bench press for years and neglects all the isolation lifts and the direct arm work is still in a way better position than the person who never trained to begin with, right? And so that's kind of what I'm getting at here. If you're in a position like me where you just spent so much time doing input, it's now time for you to have output practice with a direct feedback loop. And that's really what's going to get you to that next level. And I really felt my own fluency with Vietnamese growing super fast ever since I started doing this. So I'd highly recommend that for you as well. One thing, however, that I didn't talk about in this video is reading. And reading is kind of a little bit controversial in the language learning community right now. A lot of people think that reading is actually harmful. So if you want to know my opinion on reading and if it's harmful or if you should do it as a beginner or not, the video on screen now is going to be really helpful for you. All right. Thank you for listening.